The divorce left me hollow, a shell of who I once was. It wasn't the kind of breakup that tore through my life like a storm. It was quieter, more insidious, like erosion wearing away at rock until nothing remained but dust. My ex-husband and I had drifted apart so gradually that by the time we signed the papers, it felt less like an ending and more like a confirmation. I no longer mattered to anyone, not even to myself. Loneliness became my constant companion, gnawing at the edges of my soul until I forgot what warmth felt like. Then Melissa reappeared in my life, a beacon of light cutting through the suffocating darkness. She came bearing laughter, wine nights, and stories from our college days, reigniting memories of a time when life seemed simpler, easier. For weeks, she made me believe I could heal, that maybe trust wasn't such a dangerous thing after all. But beneath her kindness lurked something else, something I couldn't quite name, yet an intensity hidden behind her warm smiles and lingering hugs. And then there was Jason, her husband. Quiet, reserved, almost invisible unless you paid attention. But I did pay attention, though. I wish I hadn't. His glances lingered just a fraction too long. His silences carried weight instead of emptiness. Once, during one of those cozy dinners at their house, he caught my eye across the table while Melissa laughed about some trivial story. The way he looked at me froze me in place. It wasn't lust or curiosity, but something deeper, sharper, like he saw straight through to the cracks in my heart. That moment stayed with me, replaying itself over and over in my mind like a warning sign I chose to ignore. Looking back now, I realize how calculated it all was, the way Melissa drew me closer with every hug, every whispered confidence, while Jason silently anchored me with his gaze. They weren't just offering friendship or comfort. They were setting a trap, one I didn't see coming until it was already too late. At first, the gatherings at Melissa and Jason's house felt like a lifeline thrown into the dark waters I was drowning in. They were warm, inviting, almost too perfect. Melissa would greet me with hugs that lingered just a second longer than usual, her arms wrapping around me like she never wanted to let go. At first, I chalked it up to her naturally affectionate nature. After all, this was Melissa, the same woman who had always been my rock during college. But as time went on, those embraces began to feel heavier, more deliberate. One evening, after an especially long day at work, I arrived at their home feeling emotionally drained. Melissa pulled me aside while Jason was in the kitchen preparing drinks. She placed both hands on mine, holding them tightly as if trying to anchor me to reality. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. "You look tired. Are you sleeping okay?" Before I could respond, she leaned closer, her fingers intertwining with mine for what felt like an eternity. My heart raced not from excitement, but from confusion. Was this normal? Was I reading too much into her actions? I didn't know how to react, so I laughed nervously and changed the subject. Jason, meanwhile, was no less subtle, though his approach was quieter, more calculated. He started positioning himself closer to me during conversations, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my ear when he spoke. It wasn't invasive, it was intimate, unsettlingly so. Once, while discussing a movie we had all recently watched, he rested his hand lightly on my shoulder as he leaned in to make a point. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, not because it was unpleasant, but because it felt charged with something unspoken. When I turned to meet his gaze, his eyes held mine for a moment too long, searching, questioning. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the conversation, but inside, I was unraveling. The dynamic between us shifted subtly yet unmistakably. What once seemed like harmless camaraderie now felt layered with hidden meaning. During one particularly memorable dinner, Melissa suggested we play a game where each person shared something personal about themselves. When it was my turn, I hesitated, unsure of what to say. Melissa reached over and placed her hand on top of mine again, her thumb stroking gently. "You can trust us," she said softly, her words carrying a weight I couldn't quite place. Across the table, Jason nodded slowly, his expression unreadable but intense. For the first time, I felt caught in a web I hadn't realized I'd stepped into. Their gestures, once comforting, now felt like threads tightening around me, pulling me deeper into something I wasn't ready to face. It was one of those evenings where the air felt heavier, like the kind of stillness before a storm. The dinner had been pleasant: Melissa's famous lemon herb chicken, Jason's grilled vegetables, and that bottle of red wine I brought but immediately regretted because it was too expensive for my budget. But as the night wore on, something shifted. The conversation became softer, slower, like we were tiptoeing around an unspoken boundary. Melissa leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me want to look away but couldn't. "Do you ever feel so lonely," she began, her voice low and deliberate, "that you just want someone to touch you?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, her tone laced with something unreadable yet undeniably charged. I froze, my fork hovering midair, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. Was this a joke? A test? Or worse, an invitation? Before I could respond, Jason stood up abruptly, clearing his plate from the table. His movements were calm, almost mechanical, but there was something unsettling about the silence he carried with him. As I rose to help clear the dishes, he placed his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that should have felt casual, polite even. But it didn't. His touch lingered, his fingers pressing lightly against my spine in a way that sent a shiver racing through me. It wasn't overtly inappropriate, but it wasn't innocent either. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt myself rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. What was happening? Was I imagining the weight behind his touch, the deliberate pause before he finally stepped away? When I turned to glance at Melissa, she was watching us, or rather watching me, with that same enigmatic smile she always wore. Her expression gave nothing away, but her gaze seemed to pierce straight through me, as if she knew exactly what I was feeling. For a moment, I thought she might say something, anything to break the tension. But instead, she simply tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a faint smirk that left me more unsettled than reassured. That's when it dawned on me. This wasn't friendship anymore. This wasn't kindness or camaraderie. Something darker, more complex, was unfolding beneath the surface, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know where it would lead. It was one of those evenings where the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the three of us cocooned in a bubble of soft candlelight and whispered confessions. The air was thick with something unspoken, like an invisible thread pulling tighter with every passing moment. Melissa leaned forward, her hands clasped together as if she were about to deliver some profound truth. Her voice broke the silence, steady but deliberate. "We don't want you to feel alone anymore." The words hung there, suspended in the heavy atmosphere, each syllable dripping with meaning I couldn't quite grasp yet. She didn't smile when she said it. Her expression was serious, almost solemn, as though this declaration carried more weight than anything else we'd ever shared. Jason sat across from me, his face partially illuminated by the flickering candles. His eyes locked onto mine, dark and endless, like they could see straight through my carefully constructed walls. They weren't just looking at me. They were seeing me, all of me, the parts I kept hidden even from myself. That gaze stripped me bare, leaving me exposed and vulnerable in a way that felt both terrifying and intoxicating. I tried to look away, to break the spell, but I couldn't. It was as if their combined presence had woven a net around me, drawing me deeper into their orbit with every second that passed. In that moment, everything shifted. Melissa's words weren't casual or kind, they were intentional, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to confront. And Jason's silence spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't nod, didn't flinch, didn't move. He simply watched, his stillness radiating a quiet intensity that made my chest tighten. I wanted to believe this was compassion, pure and simple, but deep down, I knew better. There was something else simmering beneath the surface, something darker, more complex, a current of desire and longing that blurred the lines between friendship, loyalty, and something far riskier. I felt like I was being pulled into a whirlwind, spinning faster and faster until I couldn't tell up from down. All the moral boundaries I thought were clear and unwavering began to dissolve under the heat of their attention. Was this love? Comfort? Or was it manipulation disguised as care? My mind screamed for clarity, but my heart refused to listen. Every instinct told me to step back, to protect myself, but another part of me, the part that craved connection so desperately, wanted to lean in, to surrender to whatever they were offering. The duality tore at me, leaving me paralyzed, caught between the safety of what I knew and the dangerous allure of the unknown. For the first time, I questioned not just them, but myself. Who was I in this story, and how far was I willing to go? The message came late that night, after I had already convinced myself it was all a blur of wine and misplaced intentions. 2 words from Jason, "You okay?" Just 2 words, simple enough to seem innocent, but they landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through my mind. I stared at the screen, the glow of my phone casting shadows on the walls of my dimly lit bedroom. My heart pounded unevenly, each beat reverberating in my ears as if trying to remind me I was still alive. Was this concern? Or was it something darker, a test, a lure, another thread pulling me deeper into their web? I couldn't stop thinking about Melissa's face when she made her cryptic offer earlier that evening. She hadn't flinched, hadn't hesitated. Her smile was warm but unreadable, like she knew exactly how far she could push without crossing any lines I wasn't even sure existed anymore. And now Jason's text felt like an echo of her words, soft yet deliberate, like he was finishing a sentence she'd started. Were they whispering about me right now, debating how far I'd go? Was this some twisted game where they took turns playing good cop, bad cop with my emotions? My hands trembled as I tried to type a response. The cursor blinked mockingly at me, waiting for an answer I didn't have. Did he mean it sincerely? Was this his way of reaching out because he cared, or was he simply following a script Melissa had written for him? I imagined them sitting together on their couch, phones between them, laughing quietly while they waited for my reply. The thought made bile rise in my throat. What if Melissa was controlling everything from behind the scenes, using Jason as her pawn to see how much I'd tolerate before breaking completely? But then there was another possibility, one that terrified me more than anything else. What if Jason truly meant it? What if he genuinely cared, not just as a friend or a passive observer, but as someone who wanted me in a way I couldn't comprehend? That idea was intoxicating and suffocating all at once. It pulled me in with promises of connection, of being seen and desired, but left me gasping for air under the weight of its implications. If this was real, if either of them actually felt something, it would change everything. But what if it wasn't? What if they were both playing me, testing my loyalty, seeing how far I'd stray from the moral compass I clung to so tightly? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, the way Melissa tilted her head when she asked her probing questions, the way Jason's gaze lingered just a second too long. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but clarity remained elusive. All I knew was that I couldn't trust myself anymore. Not around them. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world outside seemed to pause and the weight of my own thoughts pressed down on me, I found myself replaying moments I had once dismissed as harmless. One stood out vividly, Melissa's arms slipping around me from behind, her voice a whisper against my ear. You're so beautiful when you smile. At the time, it had felt like nothing more than a fleeting compliment, the kind friends exchange without a second thought. But now, in hindsight, it carried an undertone I couldn't ignore, a promise disguised as praise. A line drawn just close enough to blur boundaries. Her embrace wasn't tight or desperate. It was soft, deliberate, almost possessive in its warmth. And that whisper lingered in my mind long after she stepped away, haunting me with its duality, tender yet unsettling, comforting yet charged. Then there was Jason. His touch during one of our dinners came back to me in flashes, an accidental brush of his hand against mine as he poured wine into my glass. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but the way his fingers grazed mine sent a jolt through me that I tried to rationalize away. He didn't pull back immediately. Instead, he held my gaze, his eyes dark and searching, as though they were trying to unravel something hidden beneath my carefully constructed facade. There was no mistaking the intensity in his stare. It wasn't curiosity. It was hunger, raw and restrained. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but instead, he smiled faintly, a silent acknowledgement of what neither of us dared to put into words. That look stayed with me, replaying itself over and over until it became impossible to separate memory from imagination. These fragments of the past now felt like puzzle pieces fitting together too perfectly, forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see. Melissa's embrace and Jason's lingering touch weren't isolated incidents. They were threads woven into a larger tapestry of intention. Each gesture, no matter how small, had been building toward something I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. They made me feel seen, desired, alive, but not in the way love should feel. This wasn't safety. This was danger wrapped in familiarity, a game where trust was both the prize and the weapon. The realization left me breathless, my chest tightening as if the walls of my apartment were closing in. How could I have been so blind? Or worse, had I chosen not to see? The lake house was supposed to be an escape, a retreat into nature, where the air smelled fresher and life felt simpler. But from the moment we arrived, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, hidden but undeniable. The first night, Melissa sat so close to me on the couch that her leg pressed against mine, warm and deliberate. Her hand found its way to my thigh, resting there as if it belonged. She leaned in, her voice soft but weighted with meaning. Do you know how much we care about you? It wasn't a question, it was a statement, delivered with such intimacy that it left me breathless. I wanted to pull away, to create space between us, but something held me still. Was it fear? Curiosity? Or the desperate need to believe that someone truly cared? Then Jason stepped in, his presence both calming and unsettling. He offered to massage my shoulders, his tone casual but his eyes piercing. You look tense, he said, almost as if he were reading from a script they'd written together. I hesitated, unsure of what to say or do, but Melissa reassured me with one of her enigmatic smiles. Trust me, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. He's good at this. And so I let him touch me, his hands strong yet gentle, meeting the knots in my shoulders with precision. Every movement felt deliberate, like he was trying to communicate something beyond words. Melissa watched silently from across the room, curled up in an armchair with a glass of wine in hand. Her smile lingered, not a smirk, not a grin, but something deeper, darker, like she knew exactly what effect their combined attention was having on me. She didn't look jealous or possessive. Instead, she seemed pleased, satisfied, as though this was all part of some unspoken plan. Her gaze darted between Jason and me, connecting us in a silent triangle of desire and uncertainty. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it all, if maybe I was projecting my own fears and desires onto them. But then Jason's fingers pressed harder into my muscles, grounding me back in reality, and Melissa's smile widened ever so slightly. The air grew heavier with each passing second, thick with unspoken promises and veiled intentions. This wasn't just affection, it was a performance, choreographed down to the smallest detail. They weren't just offering comfort, they were weaving me into their world, pulling me deeper into a web I couldn't see but could certainly feel. My heart raced, torn between the thrill of being desired and the dread of what might come next. I wanted to scream, to run, to break free from whatever spell they had cast over me. But I stayed, frozen in place, unable to resist the pull of their shared intensity. The night air on the balcony was cool against my skin, a sharp contrast to the heat rising in my chest. I had stepped outside to clear my head, to escape the weight of Melissa's words and Jason's unreadable gaze. But peace was fleeting. Behind me, the door creaked open softly, and before I could turn around, Jason was there close, too close. His presence filled the space between us, electric and unrelenting. And then it happened. Without warning, his lips brushed mine, soft yet deliberate, like a question whispered into the void. It wasn't forceful or demanding. It was hesitant, almost tender, as if he were testing the boundaries of something neither of us fully understood. But the gentleness of the kiss didn't soften its impact. It hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under into an abyss of emotions I wasn't prepared to face. My breath hitched, my body frozen, caught between the urge to pull away and the inexplicable desire to stay. Before I could process what had just occurred, another sound broke through the silence, the soft padding of bare feet against wood. Melissa appeared, her silhouette framed by the dim light spilling from the house. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for anything that would make sense of this tangled web we were weaving. But instead, she did the opposite. She walked toward us, her movements calm and unhurried, as though she had been expecting this all along. When she reached me, she didn't shout or glare, she simply took my hand in hers, her grip firm but not harsh. Her touch sent a jolt through me, grounding me back to reality, even as it unraveled everything I thought I knew about trust and loyalty. The three of us stood there in silence, the air thick with unspoken words and simmering tension. Melissa's eyes met mine, searching, probing, as though she were trying to see into my soul. There was no jealousy in her gaze, no betrayal, only a quiet intensity that mirrored the storm raging inside me. Jason remained still beside me, his presence both comforting and suffocating. In that moment, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between safety and surrender. The intimacy of it all was overwhelming, chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to put distance between myself and the chaos they had created. But my feet stayed rooted to the spot, held captive by their shared intensity. The days following the lake house trip felt like a slow unraveling, each moment stretching into an eternity of unanswered questions and gnawing doubts. When Melissa's text finally came through cold, clinical, and devoid of any warmth, it hit me like a slap across the face. We need boundaries. Just 3 words, but they carried the weight of 1,000 betrayals. The same woman who had held my hand under the starlit sky, who had whispered secrets in my ear with such tender intimacy, was now drawing lines I hadn't even realized existed until she erased them. Her message wasn't angry or apologetic, it was detached, almost mechanical, as if she were tidying up loose ends before moving on to something else entirely. It left me reeling, breathless, as though I'd been discarded like a toy whose novelty had worn off. And then there was Jason, or rather, the absence of him. Not a single word, not even a fleeting acknowledgement that anything between us had ever happened. His silence was deafening, a void where his quiet intensity used to be. In the days after our return, I found myself staring at my phone, half expecting some explanation, some reassurance that I hadn't imagined everything. But nothing came. No late-night texts, no casual check-ins, no trace of the man who had kissed me so softly on that deck, his hands trembling slightly as though he too felt the enormity of what we were stepping into. His absence wasn't just painful, it was cruel, a deliberate act of erasure that made me question whether I had ever mattered to him at all. What hurt most wasn't just the rejection, it was the realization that I might have been nothing more than an experiment, a fleeting indulgence for them both. Had they planned this all along? Was I merely a distraction, a way to spice up their marriage while I stood outside looking in, mistaking their attention for connection? The thought clawed at me, digging deeper with every unanswered text, every ignored call. I replayed every moment, their glances, their touches, their words, and wondered how much of it had been real. Was any of it genuine, or was I simply a pawn in their game, a chapter they could close without hesitation once they grew bored? I wanted to hate them, to scream, to demand answers. But instead, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the same suffocating silence I tried so desperately to escape. Their actions didn't just break my trust, they shattered the fragile sense of self I'd been piecing together since the divorce. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and utterly disposable, as if I'd been stripped of whatever fleeting significance I once believed I held in their lives. I couldn't stop replaying the moments in my mind, dissecting every glance, every touch, every word they said to me. It was like trying to untangle a web so intricate that pulling one thread only tightened the others. Melissa and Jason, they had woven me into their world with such care, such precision that I hadn't realized until it was too late how deeply entangled I'd become. What started as warmth, as friendship, as something seemingly innocent, had twisted into something darker, more dangerous than I could have imagined. Trust, that fragile thing I thought I'd rebuilt after the divorce, had been weaponized against me. They didn't just offer comfort, they offered temptation, wrapped in layers of intimacy that blurred the lines between affection and manipulation. And now, staring at the wreckage of what remained, I couldn't help but wonder, was I a victim, or had I played an equal part in this? The question haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my conscience. Had I let myself be used, or had I knowingly stepped across moral boundaries because I craved connection so desperately? Melissa's words echoed in my head, "We've got you." At the time, it felt like reassurance, like safety. But now, those words carried a weight I couldn't bear, the realization that I had surrendered pieces of myself willingly, naively, without fully understanding the cost. And Jason, his silence spoke louder than any confession ever could. His quiet intensity, his lingering glances, they weren't just expressions of desire. They were invitations into something I wasn't prepared to face. Yet I accepted them, piece by piece, letting myself be pulled deeper into their orbit. But where did their responsibility end and mine begin? Was I manipulated, lured into a trap disguised as love? Or was I complicit, blinded by my own longing for something, anything to fill the void left by loneliness? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that the version of me who walked into their home weeks ago was no longer the same person standing here now. I felt fractured, torn between guilt and anger, between self-blame and accusation. Every memory of their kindness felt tainted, every moment of closeness tinged with betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make sense of the chaos they had unleashed. But deep down, I understood it wasn't about answers. It was about choices. Mine. Theirs. The ones we made when we stopped seeing each other as people and started seeing each other as possibilities. The story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the fragility of trust and how easily it can be twisted into something unrecognizable. Melissa and Jason weren't strangers. They were people I trusted implicitly, people who had stood by me when I felt invisible to the rest of the world. They offered warmth, connection, and a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. But beneath their kindness lay something darker, a labyrinth of desire and blurred boundaries that left me questioning not only them but myself. What happens when the people you rely on most become the ones who dismantle your moral compass? When love becomes less about care and more about conquest, less about honesty and more about control. Their actions didn't feel malicious at first, just intimate, intoxicating. But intimacy without boundaries is chaos disguised as passion. It pulls you in with promises of acceptance, only to leave you stranded in a storm of confusion and regret. Melissa's words still echo in my mind. "We've got you." At the time, they sounded like reassurance, like safety. Now they feel like chains, binding me to a version of myself I barely recognize. And Jason, his silence after everything spoke louder than any apology ever could. Together, they turned what should have been love into a dangerous game, one where emotions were weapons and trust was expendable. What haunts me most is realizing that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who push us furthest from our values. They made me question every line I thought was clear, every choice I believed was right. In the end, what started as comfort became chaos, and what began as warmth turned cold, leaving behind nothing but ash and silence.